My fiancée humiliated me at her corporate party, calling me her personal handyman, and told me to shut up. I left her that night. And months later, she lost her promotion when everyone saw how she treated me. I'm 30 years old. I'm an electrician and I have my own business. And about 6 months ago, I ended a 4-year relationship in the most humiliating way possible. In the middle of a corporate party full of people in expensive suits, drinking wine that probably cost more than my electric bill. The thing is, looking back, I should have seen it coming from a long time ago. But I guess when you're in love, or think you are, you convince yourself that the little warning signs are nothing. You know, just misunderstandings or bad days. I met Jessica when we were both 26. I had just opened my business. Basically, it was just me and my 2015 Ford truck with all my tools in the back, working like crazy to establish myself. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing super important yet, but she had ambitions, and I liked that about her at first, that she had goals and knew what she wanted. We met at the gym, one of those casual things where you end up talking on the treadmill and suddenly you're having coffee after the workout. At first, everything was great. I mean, really great. She seemed impressed that I had my own business at 26, said things like, it was very brave of me to go out on my own so young, that most guys our age still lived with their parents or worked jobs they hated. The first 2 years were good. I'm not gonna lie. We went out a lot, traveled a couple of times. Nothing fancy, but we weren't like that, or so I thought. I worked quite a bit, like getting up at 6 in the morning to get to jobs on time. Sometimes I didn't finish until 7 or 8 at night if there was an emergency. And I worked weekends often too, because, let's say when you have your own business, there aren't really fixed hours. But Jessica understood, or at least that's how it seemed. She said she admired my work ethic, that she liked that I was so dedicated. I remember once I fixed her entire apartment's electrical system for free, obviously, and she was super happy, invited, and her friends over to see how great everything looked, and I felt, I don't know, proud to be able to do that for her. But around the 3rd year, things started to change in subtle ways that I tried to ignore. Jessica got a promotion at work, went from being a marketing coordinator to senior manager or something like that, and suddenly everything became about networking and corporate events and meeting the right people. She started talking a lot about her work, about the projects she was managing, about her boss who apparently was super influential in the industry, and I listened because I cared. Obviously. Even though honestly I didn't understand half of what she said about brand strategies and market analysis and all that stuff. When I tried to tell her about my day, about the jobs I'd done, sometimes she'd get distracted with her phone or change the subject quickly. Once I told her excitedly about a big contract I'd gotten to do all the wiring for a new commercial building, like it was the biggest job I'd had up to that point, and she just said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and kept scrolling through Instagram. The little things kept piling up. She started making comments that at first sounded like jokes, but left me with a weird feeling in my stomach. Like when we'd go to dinner with her friends, and one of them would ask what I did. Jessica would answer before I could speak and say, "Oh, Kevin fixes things. He's very useful to have around," with a little laugh that I don't know, didn't sound entirely sincere. Or when we talked about moving in together. And she mentioned that obviously we needed a place where I could store all my tools, because she didn't want the living room full of cables and screwdrivers, as if my job was something that had to be hidden. But I told myself I was being sensitive, that she didn't mean it badly. About 8 months ago, in March I think, or maybe it was April, Jessica got another promotion, this time to director of something. I don't remember the exact title, but it was important, came with a considerable salary increase, and now she reported directly to the company's VP. She was super excited, obviously, and I was happy for her too because, yeah, she'd worked hard to get there. We celebrated that night at an expensive restaurant where the menu didn't even have prices, and I felt a little out of place in my dress shirt I'd bought on sale, but, well, it was her night and I wanted her to feel special. During dinner, she told me that now that she had this position, she needed to start attending more industry events, that it was important for her career to build a solid professional image, and that she hoped I could accompany her to these things from time to time. I told her sure, count me in, though internally I was already wondering how I was going to fit into those environments. I'm not one of those people who feels comfortable at corporate parties full of people talking about their investments and their trips to Europe, but she was. My partner, my fiancée by that point, because I'd proposed to her like 2 months before her promotion. So I thought I could make the effort. She'd said yes when I proposed, cried and everything, said I was the most honest and hardworking man she knew, and I felt we'd overcome any differences we might have. I bought the ring with 3 months of work savings. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was nice and meaningful, at least to me. The following months were weird. Jessica started obsessing over her image, over how we looked as a couple. She suggested that maybe I should buy more formal clothes for when we went out to important events. Asked me if I'd considered maybe working for a big company instead of having my own business, because that sounded more stable and professional. That conversation hurt. I'm not gonna lie. I explained to her that my business was doing well, that I had regular clients, that I was making more than many guys with office jobs, but she just said, I know. Honey, just thinking out loud. Every time she came to my house, she'd look at the mess of bills and work papers on my desk with an expression I can't describe exactly, like she was disappointed or embarrassed. Then December came. Jessica reminded me like 5 times that her company had the year-end party on December 15th, that it was super important that I go because all the executives would be there, including the CEO who was coming from the central office in New York. She told me this was her chance to shine, to show she was part of the inner circle, and that she needed me there to support her. I asked her what I should wear, and she went with me to buy a suit, one that cost like $800, which seemed crazy to me, but she insisted I couldn't show up in something cheap because people would notice. I paid with my credit card, feeling a knot in my stomach. The night of the party, we got ready at her apartment. She looked incredible, elegant black dress, perfect makeup, high heels. I put on the new suit and felt like an imposter, honestly. On the way to the venue, an events hall downtown that probably cost a fortune to rent, Jessica gave me instructions. She told me to remember the names of the important people she'd introduce me to smile a lot, to try not to talk much about my work unless directly asked, and that if someone asked, just say, I had my own business without going into details. But that seemed strange to me, like I had to hide what I did for a living. But I nodded because I didn't want to ruin her night. We arrived and the thing was exactly like I'd imagined it, like soft background music, waiters with trays of drinks, people in groups talking and laughing with those laughs that sound a little fake. Jessica transformed in seconds, went into networking mode, greeting everyone with hugs and kisses on the cheek, introducing me as her fiancé. But quickly, like I was an accessory she had to show but not too much. At first, nothing terrible happened, just boring conversations about company projects and quarterly goals, and I nodded and smiled, trying to seem interested. But then Jessica started with the comments. The first time was when a guy from her department, I think his name was Brad or Brett or something, asked what I did. Before I could answer, Jessica laughed and said, Oh, Kevin's an electrician. He's my personal handyman. I never have to pay to fix anything at home. People laughed, like it was a super funny joke, and I just stood there trying to force a smile. Then another person asked something about my business, and Jessica interrupted again, saying, Well, it's a small operation. Basically him and his truck. But he does well, considering, it's honest work. The considering sounded condescending to me, like being surprised I was doing well was the normal thing. As the night went on, Jessica drank more wine, and the comments got worse. She'd tell her colleagues things like, if you ever need someone to fix your dishwasher or change a light bulb, my fiancé is your man, with that voice she used when she wanted to sound funny, but that made me feel small. At some point, her boss came over. A woman like 45 years old, all elegant, and Jessica practically stumbled over herself introducing me. She told her, Look, Karen, meet Kevin. He's an electrician. He does those practical things that those of us in the corporate world don't understand. And they both laughed. I shook Karen's hand, feeling the blood boiling in my veins, but kept my composure because I kept thinking that maybe Jessica was just nervous, trying to fit in. What really ruined everything was when it came time for the toasts. The CEO gave a boring speech about the successful year they'd had. Several directors thanked their teams, and then Jessica took the microphone. I didn't know she was going to speak, but apparently she'd prepared something. She started thanking the team, talking about the department's achievements, and I felt proud of her for a second, seeing her, they're so confident and articulate. But then she said, and I also want to thank my fiancé, Kevin, who's here tonight. He's an electrician, so if you ever have an emergency with your dishwasher or need to install a ceiling fan, you know who to call. I just hope he doesn't charge me special rates. And the whole room burst into laughter. I was paralyzed. I felt like I'd been slapped in front of 100 people. Everyone was looking at me, some still laughing, others with that expression of pity that's almost worse than direct mockery. Jessica came down from the small stage, smiling, clearly satisfied with her joke, and when she got to where I was, she expected me to be smiling too, but must have seen something in my face because her expression changed a little. I told her quietly, I need to talk to you outside. Now. And she rolled her eyes but followed me. We went out to a terrace where it was cold. I was shaking, but I don't know if it was from the temperature or from the rage. I asked her, what the hell was that? Why did she feel she had to humiliate me in front of her entire company, and she looked at me like I was the one who was crazy. She said, Kevin, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. Everyone laughed. It's not a big deal. I told her it was a big deal. That she'd spent the whole night introducing me like I was her personal maintenance employee, making my job sound like something insignificant, and she sighed with that annoyed expression I'd seen before. She told me, look, the truth is, your job isn't exactly glamorous. I can't introduce you, saying you spend the day fixing switches. That doesn't impress anyone, and I need to impress these people to advance in my career. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her since when was she embarrassed by what I do? Since when was my honest work that allows me to live well and have my own company something I should be ashamed of? She crossed her arms and said, I'm not embarrassed, Kevin. Just be realistic. You're not building rockets or saving lives. You're an electrician. It's a service job, and that's fine for you. But it's not something I can brag about in this environment. Brag about. That word stuck with me. I'd proposed marriage to someone who saw me as something she couldn't brag about. I told her that if that's what she really thought, then clearly we'd made a mistake. I took off the engagement ring, a ring I'd bought with pride with my honestly earned money, and put it in her hand. I told her this is over, Jessica. I'm not going to marry someone who doesn't respect what I do, who sees me as less than her corporate friends just because I work with my hands. She just stared at the ring like she couldn't process what was happening, and then started saying I was overreacting, that she'd had too much to drink and wasn't thinking clearly, that we could talk about this tomorrow. But I'd already made my decision. I went back into the hall, got my coat from the coat check, and as I was leaving, Jessica caught up with me shouting that I couldn't just leave, that I was making her look bad in front of everyone. I told her she'd done that all by herself, that I was just being honest with myself. Some of her colleagues had come out to see what was happening, including her boss, Karen. And Jessica was super embarrassed trying to calm me down, but keeping that fake smile like everything was under control. I raised my voice. I'm not gonna lie. I told her in front of everyone that I wasn't going to tolerate being treated like a second-class citizen just because my job required overalls instead of a suit. And I left. I drove back to my house feeling a mix of liberated and devastated. On one hand, I'd ended something that clearly wasn't working, but on the other, I'd lost 4 years with someone I thought knew and valued me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Just stayed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing or if I should have tried to fix things. But every time I replayed the situation in my head, I remembered her face when she said my job wasn't something she could brag about, and I knew I'd made the right decision. The next day, Jessica started bombarding me with messages. At first, it was regret and apologies, saying she hadn't meant to hurt me, that she was under a lot of pressure at work and had handled everything badly. But when I didn't respond, the messages became accusatory. She said I'd ruined the most important night of her career, that I'd been dramatic and childish, that she was just trying to fit in and I'd taken everything personally when I shouldn't have. I didn't respond to any of them. I blocked her number after she sent me like 30 messages in an hour. But it didn't end there, obviously. Jessica did what people do now when something bad happens in their life, posted it on social media. She didn't mention my name specifically, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She wrote something about how some people can't handle a joke and destroy relationships over insecurities, that she'd worked very hard to get where she was and deserved someone who would support her instead of making dramatic scenes. Her friends commented things like, "You deserve better and insecure men are the worst," and I felt like garbage seeing all that, even though I knew it was her distorted version of what had happened. About 2 weeks later, I got a message from someone I didn't know on Facebook. It was a guy named Marcus who turned out to work with Jessica. He told me he'd been at the party and wanted me to know that a lot of people there had thought Jessica's comments were out of line, that several colleagues had commented afterwards that she'd been unnecessarily cruel to me. He also told me something that broke my heart even more, that Jessica always talked about me like that at the office, that she constantly made jokes about how I was useful to have around the house, but wasn't exactly husband material long term, that she felt she could aspire to more, but for now, I would do. Those were her words, according to Marcus. I would do. Like I was temporary, until she found something better. That made me rethink the whole relationship. I started remembering all the times I'd felt that weird vibe from her, all the comments I'd justified as jokes or me being sensitive, and I realized Marcus was probably right. Jessica had never really respected me. Maybe at the beginning when we were starting out, and she wasn't so into her corporate world, but definitely not in the last few years. I'd been convenient, someone who fixed things for free, who didn't demand much attention because I worked so much, someone stable while she climbed in her career. A month later, Jessica's best friend, Sophie, who I'd gotten along well with all those years, contacted me. She said we needed to talk because she felt guilty keeping information. We met for coffee and Sophie told me that Jessica had admitted privately several times that she felt she'd settled for me, that when we met, I seemed to have potential, but then she realized I was never going to be more than an electrician with a small business, and that didn't fit with the life she wanted. Sophie said she'd tried to tell Jessica that was horrible, that I was a good guy, and that work didn't define a person's value, but that Jessica had become increasingly obsessed with status and appearances. Sophie apologized for not telling me anything before, said she'd been a coward and felt terrible about it. I thanked Sophie for her honesty, even though it hurt to hear those things. It confirmed what I'd already started to suspect. Jessica had seen me as something easy to control, someone who would be grateful to be with her, and therefore wouldn't question her behavior. She probably thought I'd never have the courage to leave her, especially after proposing marriage. But she was wrong. I decided to take some time for myself. I asked my temporary employee, a young guy who was learning the trade, to handle the routine jobs for a few days, and I went alone to a cabin in the mountains that a client had mentioned he rented out. I spent 4 days there without much contact with anyone, just walking, thinking, trying to process everything. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to be enough for Jessica that I'd stopped living for myself. I'd stopped seeing my friends as much as before because she always had events or plans that included her people. I'd stopped doing things I enjoyed, like going to soccer games or playing guitar on Sundays, because Jessica said those things were a waste of time or made too much noise. When I came back from the mountains, I felt different. I wouldn't say I was happy yet, but I was at peace with my decision. I blocked Jessica from all social media, deleted the photos we had together, donated the expensive suit I'd bought for her party. I decided to focus on my business and on rebuilding the parts of my life I'd neglected. About 3 months later, I found out through a mutual friend that Jessica had had problems at work. Apparently, the party scene hadn't gone over as well as she thought. Several employees had commented negatively about how she'd treated her fiancé publicly, and her boss Karen had had a conversation with her about professionalism and corporate image. Turns out making your partner look bad doesn't make you look good either. Who would have thought? Jessica wasn't fired or anything dramatic like that, but they did pass her over for another promotion she was expecting, and according to my friend, she was bitter, blaming me for ruining her reputation. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. Honestly, I didn't want things to go badly for Jessica. I just wanted her to leave me alone and acknowledge that what she did was wrong. But I guess that was never going to happen. People like her never take responsibility for their actions. There's always someone else to blame. The last few months have been about growth for me. I expanded my business, hired 2 more employees instead of just working with temps, and now I handle bigger projects. I also started teaching evening classes at the local technical school, teaching young people who want to learn the trade, and that's given me a satisfaction I didn't expect. Seeing these kids excited to learn something practical and useful reminds me why I love what I do. I don't need validation from people at corporate parties. I don't need my job to sound impressive at a cocktail party. I just need to know I'm doing something valuable that helps people and allows me to live with dignity. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Jessica. I started going out on Fridays to watch games again, picked up the guitar again, even started dating someone new about a month ago. An elementary school teacher who thinks it's cool that I have my own business and understands the value of honest work. It's still early to know if it's going to work long term. But what I do know is that she makes me feel valued for who I am, not ashamed of how I make a living. Last week, I was working on a new house, installing the entire electrical system, and the owner told me he'd been looking for someone reliable for months because all the electricians he'd contacted either charged a fortune or did poor quality work. He told me I came highly recommended by several neighbors and that he was grateful to have found me. As I drove home that day, I thought about Jessica and how she used to introduce me as her personal handyman, and I laughed. Because it turns out that being good at what you do, being reliable and honest in your work, is worth more than any corporate title or networking event. And if someone can't see that, then they don't deserve to be in your life, period. I'm not going to say I'm completely over everything that happened, because 4 years don't erase easily, but I'm in a better place than I was 6 months ago. I learned you can't build a life with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect who you are. And I learned it's okay to stand up for your worth, even when that means losing something you thought you wanted. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that break your heart in the moment, but then you realize saved you from something much worse.